Hello, welcome back. In this video, I've got a new microphone, so hopefully you can hear me a little bit better. I'm going to go through the Raspberry Pi setup for the robot project. For this project, I decided to use a Raspberry Pi Zero W. The W stands for wireless, I believe. It's essentially the same as a Pi Zero, but it has built-in wireless internet capabilities, which will be useful for this robot because we'll be able to communicate with a server or be able to send commands remotely, and you don't have to worry about plugging in and uploading code and that kind of thing. Once the battery's there, once the robot is roaming free, you can send code to it remotely. I did think about using an Arduino for this project, and I did actually play around quite a bit with the Arduino, but it's just a little bit more complicated because you have to add the wireless capability separately. And I decided that the small form factor of the Zero W and the built-in wireless capability made it the best solution. I'm trying to keep the size down on this robot because I want it to be quite small, and I want it to be able to get into some tight spaces. This video is going to go through how to install the software needed for the Pi Zero. In this case, I'm going to use the Raspbian operating system, which is I guess it's the default for Raspberry Pis. You can use it on pretty much any Pi. I've also got a Pi 3, but we can install this software, this operating system, on an SD card, a mini SD card, sorry, micro SD card, and then it'll run on the Pi Zero. So I'm going to go through that. If you've already got a micro SD card with a operating system installed, maybe you've got Noobs or Raspbian, then you don't need to follow this video. You can skip to the next one. This is just going to go through how to get that first bit set up so that you've got a functioning Raspberry Pi ready to connect to your motor controller and get the rest of the robot set up. Yes, some Pi kits are sold with Noobs pre-installed on the card. That's why I mentioned that. So say that again, if you've got that pre-installed, you don't need to worry about this. I'm assuming that you've got a Pi already. You can get a Zero W on it by itself for £9.60 at the moment. This is pimaroni.com. And I would recommend you get it with the adapters, which is an extra few pounds, because you'll probably want to have these extra little connectors here, and it's just useful to have a micro USB to USB adapter as well, just in case you need it. In this case, we probably will need it, so I'd recommend spending a few pounds extra. So once you've got that, the other thing you're going to need is a micro SD card. These are very cheap on eBay. This one's a £5. You probably just want an 8GB one. You don't want to go too crazy. You're not going to be storing a huge amount of data. You're just going to install Raspbian and that's about it, and do and store a bit of code. But it's not going to be really resource hungry or anything. And then, yeah, those are the only two things you need. You'll need some sort of micro SD charger, just the same one as you'd use for your phone. So I'm sure you probably have one of those lying around you can use quite happily. So the first step, once you've got your Pi Zero and your SD card, is to flash the SD card with your operating system. That just means you'll load the operating system onto the card, ready for putting into the Pi and turning on. You'll need to go to the Raspberry Pi website, which is raspberrypi.org, and then click on Downloads, and you'll see the screen for Raspbian. And then I downloaded the zip file, and I think it's about 2GB. Let me have a look. So you'll get a zip file, Raspbian stretch, and yeah, it's 1.7GB. You want to extract this. I'm using 7-zip, which you can download, but I think you can also use the built-in Windows file extractor, zip extractor. Okay, and once that's finished, you navigate into that directory, and you've got this .img file. Now what you're going to want to do with that is flash it onto your Raspberry Pi. This is my Raspberry Pi. I'll show you how that SD card slots in a second. Once you've got it on the SD card, you'll be able to plug it in and it should run. But you'll need to get that .image file, .amg file onto the SD card first. Now, hopefully, I'm hoping you've got an SD card slot, on your computer. If you don't, you can buy SD card converters, which are basically just little USB sticks that have an SD card slot. If you search SD card USB adapter on eBay or Amazon, you should be able to find a very cheap one. So plug your SD card into one of those, and it should come up on your computer as an external drive. Once you've done that, you can download something called Etcher. Let me find the website. It's etcher.io. It's a very simple program which allows you to choose the image. In this case, it's a .img file. Select the drive you want to install it onto, and then click flash, and it will install that image onto the SD card. So what you do is you download this, run it, select the Raspbian image, select your SD card, flash it, and it will go through the process. It will validate that it's done, and then you can unplug it. You can unplug the SD card from your laptop or from the adapter, and you're ready to plug it into the Raspberry Pi. So once your SD card has finished flashing, you'll want to plug it into the SD card slot shown here on the left of the Raspberry Pi. Once you've got that in there, just goes in, give it a push, make sure it's all the way in, and then you'll need to think about powering the board, applying the power through the USB port onto the Raspberry Pi. Now I've got just a standard micro USB cable. You can plug that into your laptop, or you can plug it into a charger. If you put that into the power import, there's two micro USB ports. Make sure you get it into the power port, and then once that's plugged in, which I'm doing now, you'll see a USB light comes on the board. It's very small, but you see it on the top right. It will start flashing. That just means that the board is working, and crucially that the SD card is operating correctly. If you don't get a flashing light, it doesn't necessarily mean your board is broken, so don't worry too much. It could just be that your SD card hasn't been flashed correctly. So I would check that, double check that you've flashed it correctly, double check that it's functioning properly before you write it off and buy a new Raspberry Pi. There are two ways of setting it up. Once you've got the operating system installed, Raspbian working on the Pi. In this case, I'm not going to use a keyboard and a mouse and a screen, simply because I don't want to do that. I want to use the SSH client to log into the Raspberry Pi remotely, as I think it will be easier to push code to the Pi that way. If you want to, you can. If you're having problems such as this, like the light's not coming on, or you want to check that Raspbian is functioning properly, then you can plug in the HDMI cable and a mouse and a keyboard, and you'll be able to log into Raspbian, and you have a desktop interface which will allow you to check that everything's functioning properly. Again, if you plug everything in, you turn it on and nothing happens, it's likely to be a problem with the SD card. But in this case, and for the rest of the videos in this tutorial, I'm going to assume that you'll be using what they call a headless setup, which means no keyboard, no mouse. You're just accessing the Raspberry Pi remotely. And I'll go into more of that in more detail in the next video.